I've gotten something really special into the Geek Gamer's office, which is the Into the Weird and Wild supplement by Charles Ferguson Avery. This is published by what was sent to me by Wet Ink Games, and it has a dual publication here of Feral Indie Studio and Wet Ink Games. It is, well, let's take a look at the back first off to explain how they say it. This is a supplemental book for those seeking to incorporate a weird and terrifying wilderness into their role-playing game. It contains rules for wilderness travel and survival, hunting, tracking, butchering monsters, 50 beasts of branch and bone, strange and savage items and spells, an essay and guidelines on running and creating wilderness dungeons, and that's where we're going to start in this discussion, a step-by-step guide for generating your own wilderness adventure, 100 random wilderness locations, and a whole bunch of tables for random diseases, wilderness dressings, traps, hazards, flora, encounters, and more. It really is a treasure trove of information, and bearing in mind, as we discuss, this is not the woods of peaceful fae and beast, but the dark and twisted children's tale that kept you full of terror. The woods do not care for you. Never forget that. It is a world of fear, madness, and bloodshed, ruled over by the uncaring watch of ancient trees. So that is the theme of this material, and you can see this is a beautiful presentation. There's 2 ribbons inside. The book itself is very elaborately produced, and if you can see here the art, it might be a little hard to show up as it is subtle. This kind of skeleton thing that's also growing out of the ground with roots gives you a sense of the flavor of what will be to come inside. I mentioned that we're going to start with the Wilderness Dungeon, and we are. That's in the back of the book. But quickly before we get there, I just want to read to you what the creators identify as the audience for the book. Into the Weird and Wild is a book for those seeking to incorporate a weird and terrifying wilderness into their game. Players and GMs who enjoy a level of horror and prefer the sweeping, darkened landscapes of forest and mires to the well-trodden cobblestone of dungeons need look no further when it comes to books. Presented within the book is a light overhaul of the adventuring system, modified to fit better with a campaign centered around forays into the frightening wilderness. Even groups who do not wish to adventure in the wilds will find a wealth of information with spells, items, flora, and all manner of monster. It is system neutral, and it says while the contents of Into the Weird and Wild were designed for D&D and the OSR, this book has been written to be as system neutral as possible. Rules and stats are written bare bone with the intention of being wildly compatible. Enough information is given that a GM and player can easily adapt it to their own preferred system. And we've got a translation of terms, sort of some glossary here. We may turn to that later. But I want to get to the back of the book first in this discussion because it is something that is, I think, going to be extremely useful in many different types of sessions that one could have. This is a section on the wilderness dungeon, and it is defined as the space betwixt the home and the dungeon. Swaths of wilderness, shadowed and unmapped, except for its boundaries, are callously sliced with trails and roads, eager to avoid those shadows between the trees. What it is saying here is that with a glimmer of imagination, it becomes easy to recognize the telltale marks of a dungeon, in the wilderness, that is to say. There is little reason not to use a wilderness dungeon. By form, any forest or spot of wild lands has the potential to hold a wilderness dungeon. They present themselves as bastions of terrible natural forces, each containing monsters and hazards that drive hardened killers out like screaming children. And there is a further essay here on the forest as a dungeon, that a roof made of twisted leaves and branches, a labyrinth of wood, that forests are, in a way, already a dungeon. They encompass large expanses of area, are filled with multitudes of life and hazards, and are peppered with odd areas of interest to be explored. It talks about trails as corridors, mapping it onto the concept of a dungeon, and distance itself being a hazard, that the farther you travel, the more potential for hazard there is. There is a step-by-step 10-step rule here for randomly generating a wilderness dungeon, and the rest of the material here that follows is going to walk you through this. There's provided here this 6-mile hex that you can base your dungeon in, because it says that the wilderness map is not constrained to a single area, but of course it expands many miles across, and it's going to be connected by a network of trails and paths from point to point. So wilderness dungeons themselves as a concept are a combination of a dungeon crawl and a hex crawl. So you are allowed or provided here with a concept of starting with an entrance and then a D8 table of random encounters. To determine the number of areas here, it's asking you to roll a 1d8 to determine the number of rooms that are going to be placed in here. So if you rolled a 7, you'd have 7 different areas, and then you would drop your d6s onto this hex to form a random area. And then each one of those d6s is going to represent a particular area within the dungeon. And you will then take your d6s and you will determine what is going to be in that area. So for example, for all the 4s, there's going to be a hamlet and a large riverbed. And it will show you then, moving through, how you will draw this out. And you can see here that number 3 has a house and a large ring of stones, moving to this hamlet and a large riverbed. And remember, these are represented by miles. And then you're going to be rolling a d8 to determine the connection points between what you have rolled up, and further building out the concept of these connection points by continuing to roll dice and referring to the keys that are provided to give you the area of what it is. So moving back to this large riverbed here, it describes the size of the area, and you've rolled up that there's 3 visible trails and a simple footpath to the north, and then there's a hidden trail to the southwest. There are other tables that will give you concepts for what you call a place, and we'll look at those in a minute. And this is a detail of, for example, how you could have mapped something out using this. You can see here pretty much every large table in this book is a D50 table. So what you would be doing is you would be taking your D100 dice and rolling them. And if you got a value above 50 on this one, you would subtract 50 from it. So for example, if you rolled a 79, that would correspond to actually a 29. So you're just duplicating it. And in that manner, you can easily, well, here I rolled a 78, so that would actually be a 28. So we would look up here that our area is the maze, and here we rolled a 53. Again, that would bring us down to 3. The Maze of Awakening is where we would start. That's a pretty good place to start, actually. So that is going to be the construct that you'll need to do for all of the D50 tables. And it provides you here a list of dangers, the secret or treasure. So for example, a danger here in this Maze of Awakening, just with random pointing here, is that memories are hard to keep, and a memory that is utterly important but long forgotten. There are various wilderness scenes that you can roll. So as you're going, you could find a canyon complex carved deep into the ground, and you're in an area that is here. Strong, healthy beech trees, roots snarl around skulls. This obviously could be used just to generate a story as walking, and you're going to see me in a future video using this material in that manner. It is suggestive in that way. It is just providing an atmosphere. You don't necessarily need to have an encounter or roll for an encounter. It's just a description as you're going. You could even use these prompts to create a story and add a little journaling into your adventure. There are smells and sound. There's a smells and sounds table. So let's give an example of that. Again, a 75 is going to correspond to 25. So we hear the pained, shrieking howls from a cat or some animal. So you could choose to ignore that or choose to consider that would be a possible encounter. And there are, if you stick to this source material, there are 50 different beings here. They're not numbered in the anywhere. So there are 50 of them, but you'd either have to write in your book or create a separate table or just count off if you wanted to roll up a random one. But in that case, there was a suggestion that it might have been like a cat. So I suppose you could look here to see if there was anything that met that. Well, here's a spindle cat. So let's say there is a spindle cat caught in a trap or something. And we can take a look here now at the way that the authors present the beasts. Again, it is system neutral, so you're going to have some reference points, but you will need to do some modification to link it to the specific rule set that you are using. So we're given here an armor class, and this one is as hide or as leather. We're given a number of hit dice, which could allow you to refer to a table, again, depending on the rule set that you were using. HP, the type of move it makes, the type of damage it does, how many of them there could be, and an XP value, and some specifics about their mode of interaction or attack. So here, the spindle cat, all within eyesight, save versus charm, or become paralyzed in a stupefied trance. So that's giving you a very specific way of immediately having some type of interaction with it. And there's a glossary here in the front that's going to explain to you that the save versus charm here could be corresponded to a charisma stat if that's what you had. And obviously if you didn't have a charisma stat, you would have to adapt. So adapting this material is going to be key to using it. What's great is that there's also narrative description here. And it says the sound of something large shifts in the trees above. A pair of clawed limbs dance silently from branch to branch. A feline creature with limbs as thin and long as pole arms slowly crawls like a spider in the dark. Its face becomes visible, and a pair of chromatic eyes lock with your own. The concentric colors seem to spin. Your mind begins to fade to nothing but its wondrous, maddening eyes. And you can see now, just with what I was talking about earlier on when I did that, when you're in the maze of, I can't remember what it was because I'm filming this in a single take, but and the concept of memories, immediately there's already a narrative forming here. We're just standing there. I don't even have a character actually. And yet as we're rolling and walking and going, you can see that you're generating a story from this. It tells us that spindle cats are lithe nocturnal hunters. Their danger is almost legendary, as most who encounter them wind up dead. They hide in the canopies of trees, adept at silently leaping from branch to branch before descending on unsuspecting prey, always eating the eyes of their victims first, and their gaze is their most dangerous weapon. So in this regard, we have a story developing that there is this spindle cat perhaps caught somewhere. It's shrieking. Maybe it needs help. You could decide that you would help it and determine if you did successfully help it, would you get something from it? There are rules here for the first part of the book has various rules that you could sort of add on. And some of the rules have to do with cleaning a body. So you could, if you are killing this beast, there are rules here for what ability you have to cleanse the body, to clean the body, to get something from it, and that there's a D10 table of a random uncommon good thing or a rare good thing that you might find. So in this particular case with this story, if you're trying to help this creature as opposed to just killing it, you could still apply these rules and say that you get something from it. It might not be the fresh heart if you're trying to help it, but you could abstract out, perhaps instead of a fresh heart from the creature, you get some type of healing spell. Or you could just go the gruesome route and go and this thing is already trapped, killing it, and then cleaning the body and getting something from it. Moving to the front of the book, what is a great, really interesting combination here of material, source material, and actual rules that you can port into your own session. It says the following section will introduce a series of optional mechanics designed to be simple, thematic, and allow for realistic but fun wilderness-style adventuring. Wealth becomes a measure of supplies. Monsters can easily be butchered for food and cash, and settling in for the night becomes a question of digging into valuable supplies or collectively suffering exhaustion. And it is described as a toy box method. That is not to say that these mechanics have to all be used, but each one was designed to stand on its own as a small, interesting puzzle for players to solve, exploit, and inevitably break. Because they're modular, you can piece them together in ways that create a certain type of theme. So for example, it says looking to have some fun hunting monsters without the survival mechanic, you could add the hunt and cleaning a body and not the survival mechanic. So let's take a look at what is here. I think they're fabulous because they are, as described, self-contained, and they don't add a lot of rules overhead, yet they do add a lot of theme. So for example, this is the rule of gold exhaustion, and it says that money is a construct of the civilized world. Coins and precious metals have little worth within the confines of the wilds. So it's suggesting that what is the true representation of wealth in the wilds is based on supply. And it is offering you a method of converting, if you have characters with gold, for example, a way of converting that into a concept of supply. And then it's providing you with a very easy way for determining types of diminishment of that supply, of certain exhaustion states, and what that might mean for you. And again, you can simply make this conversion, do this roll as you walk through an exterior space, and then when you get back to wherever you are, reconvert back to your gold or whatever makes sense for you in your own session. So it allows, it's like a porting of the concept, and that would be for exhaustion. Ditto for surviving the night. What it is having you do here is take 3d6s and rolling them to attempt to make a camp, to register the successes on, say, a 4 to 6 to determine how many successes you have had, and abstracting that into being a success in terms of foraging or overall survival. And then there is a table here that says, that offers what it means for the number of successes that you have. So lots of successes, you can just manage and get by. 2 successes, you're going to survive, but somebody's going to have to gain a level of exhaustion. And the exhaustion could be either referenced back to here if you're using this, or you could come up with some other abstracted way in your own world, in your own mechanics for modeling what exhaustion might mean. Or maybe everybody gets a level of exhaustion. And it gives an example of play here. So rolling the 3d6, they got no successes, and then it's a terrible turn of events. However, one of the characters has a benefit of foraging, so that would then turn into, say, 1 success, and you could replace the failure with a success based on your own character. Again, it is abstracted, but it is effective in just giving a little bit of that theme, and in putting your characters, when they're in the wilds, in the external world, putting them into a situation where that world is going to impact them mechanically in the game, at least as far as they're there. We have a section of rules for hunting. If you want to try to model something like hunting, there is step-by-step here. It follows the steps to select the quarry. So you decide on what you're going to be hunting. You don't have to decide exactly what it's going to be. And they're pretty detailed rules here that you could actually follow if you're deciding that, for example, you're trying to find something that's uncommon. There is you assign it a certain number of marks between 3 and 9. And then you are attempting, as you're traveling, you have to keep track of your distance to continue to roll to see whether you are finding marks, finding double marks perhaps, or having a setback of major or minor nature. And then here are what those options are. So this is a little bit more involved because it does require actually a certain pace that you're tracking and how many times you are making the effort to do the tracking, and it gives you then the goal that you're trying to reach, and you keep rolling that D6, and then you could potentially be failing, of course, and destroying your supplies, or perhaps you could find a remote cabin that will provide shelter. So this is a little bit more involved and would require that you're actually keeping track of distances, but it does model a hunting mechanic. Or you could even just take something from this and say, I'm doing one roll. I'm going to hunt and see what I get. And a mark would be just a success. A double mark might be a success plus, and a double mark and a boon might be success plus you could roll on this table. So you could, again, modify this particular rule, as with all of them, as much or as little as you liked. We referred to cleaning a body earlier in this video, and there are actual rules for it. Again, following the general concept of taking some dice and rolling them and getting a result that is then ported into a chain of events that will lead you to something good if you're successful or not. Moon phases. Moon phases. The moon, silent, ambivalent, and always watching. There is a D20 table here that will explain the impact of a moon phase basically on the chances of having a wilderness encounter or offering an advantage or disadvantage in hunting. And what you could do really is just to use this table on its own to give a sense of how often an encounter might happen as you're going, and create a series or a set of what counts for a day of travel, and then rolling your D6 based on that to determine whether or not you actually have an encounter. There's information here if you want to give your moons a name and a further thematic description, and it will also explain that there are some special moons and what those special moons mean. So for example, if it is a gentle moon, healing magic is doubled and emotions are calmed. The moon is quiet and beams with a steady radiance. It feels warm without heat, the light caressing all with a gentle touch. The Call of the Wild. These are another D50 table here. This represents a series of changes that can occur to a character in the wilds. They are bizarre effects and mutations brought on by their new terrible environment, becoming lost rules that will allow you to model whether or not you are going where you want to go, or what will happen if you stray from the path. There are madness rules that is going to give you a persistent injury of the mind that are going to impact your character in some way mechanically. If you want, you could have a quirk that develops, you could have a madness or a deep madness that develops. And then we get into what I mentioned earlier, which are the 50 beasts that are here. This section begins with a discussion of what the stat blocks mean. They are laid out in a system-neutral fashion, allowing it to be usable by most systems with modifications. So there is a discussion, I'm not going to go through all of this, but what the armor class could mean, the HD determining the hit dice, and an example using a cleric as to how you would modify that. So it would take a little bit of modification, again, depending on the actual system that you are using. The section here on goods, it says some creatures include a sidebar specifically for possible useful trophies, items, or materials that can be gleaned from their bodies. Each one is marked with a rarity, a description, and some of the possible abilities or quirks it has. And there's a very nice piece of 4-color art here opening the section. As you can see here, there's also some random tables that come along with some of the beasts, and these are, in this case, of this snake type of beast. There is indication of random diseases that it, or poisons basically, that it could give to you, and then what the impact would be. And all of these things are, again, able to be used as you wish and bring it in thematically. So for example, the other thing is the way that it's laid out here is nice with the bolding of the first paragraph, so you could quickly look where it makes its home, what its greatest weapon is, it hunts in the cool of the night, and then of course the description of what that actually means. We'll just look through a little bit of the layout is also the same, so it's a double spread for each beast, which is helpful too, so you know what you have or don't have. So for example, this spider does not have any other random table, but it does have the uncommon good. And it says here, it's scroll web. This is cool. The delicate gossamer threads weave together into arcane inscriptions and glyphs, beautiful and primal in their construction. Each web contains one random spell of 3rd level or lower, etc. So that's pretty cool. It says it can only be transported with careful removal, placement on a flat surface, preparation with a bonding agent, all of which takes at least an hour. So you could, again, use this to just bring in or create something to do, a story that you are developing as you walk through. If you see this creature, maybe not even having to fight it, maybe just making an attempt at the web there. So this bramble beast, for example, it's uncommon good. It has you can take its skin and make it into armor. And this actually reminds me a little bit of the leaf steel armor in 4 Against Darkness, but this has a really cool effect. It says it has implant. Anything unconscious or entangled in the bramble beast's ensnaring tendrils for more than a round must save versus poison or be implanted with a bramble spawn. And then it tells you if you're implanted with a bramble spawn, each day you have to make a save versus poison, and something that happens. You get damage to your constitution and wisdom as this bramble spawn weaves its way through the body and the nervous system of who's ever inflicted. Very interesting. There are some cacophonous crowmen here there was a once race of birdmen who sought the secret of future sight for fear of coming doom. And they were unable at a certain point to peer into the future, so they came to live like animals, and the only relief against their vision comes from their constant wild chattering, and then they make some wild predictions here. So you've got a D100 table of predictions, and indeed you could even take this material, obviously, and separate it out from this particular beast, or it's almost like an NPC. And there's I just noticed this very neat way of making this table as it's coming out of the cacophonous crowmen. And just use this somehow in your session. If you discovered a scroll or something that was going to be looking into the future or whatever, you could go to this table. So the tables here, even separated from the particular beasts, offer just a ton of content. And here we have Children of the Woods, and there's a whole little generator here where you could give them a name. They might have a quest or give you a quest. They could be carrying treasure, and this again would enliven your journeys in the wilderness. And this is how you could, in effect, play an entire game. This is described as a supplemental book, but you could very much, really the only thing that it doesn't have aside from a very basic rule set that you would need, a rubric of rules, are the characters, is character generation, because beyond that, it is an entire world that you could create, populate, and have something to do here. And the last thing, I opened this living idol. This is again, a lot of flexibility here. Even with the AC, it varies dependent on the construction of what it is. And it attempts to charm enemies. And it says here how the derivation of this: occasionally, someone, be it an exiled priest, a crazed lunatic, or a failed artist, will hear the siren call of the wilds. So true. Banished from their own society, they find visions of false deities and spirits in the darkened surroundings of the wilds. Overwhelmed with these visions, they begin construction of a deranged idol, divorced from rationality and spurred by the maddening call of nature. For most, it ends there, the creator dying alone in the wilderness and their bastard creation decaying into nothing. But some don't die easily, and it is wandering around there. They're quite large, utterly mad. They can communicate commands and feelings telepathically to anyone within 100 feet, and there's no end to their growth. They keep getting more and more followers here, and you're given a D12 table. You could name it and what it is made out of, how it is decorated, and then use that to generate story or to have other rules that there's not necessarily here, but I've come across many rule sets with random tables for running into statues and things of that nature. Now the Ravengers, they have more than one page spread because there's different types of Ravengers. There's the pups, the claw dog, the blooder, and all the way up to Fang. And the wilds gift these monstrous individuals with savage blessings. To be a Ravenger is not just a state of mind, but a physical bestial change. And their bodies are deteriorating, and they will, as such, have different physical manifestations that then play into what they can do and how they act in combat. So this Ritter mote, it's an enormous semi-intelligent beast that delights in the noble art of dueling. And it says, standing a whole head taller than a person with a wingspan more than twice that, it is usually wearing a full set of scavenged armor and wearing an assortment of weapons and shields. And this is it says it typically knows 1d4 dances, and they elaborate these here: the Flyby Pirouette, and what that means, an aerial assault of spins and twirls, or the flamenco attack, or the crippling waltz. And it also gives you a little generator here to make your own with descriptions and quirks. And then when it defeats you or is defeated, it does a sort of a final dance. And there is a listing here of things that will happen. A royal fox with diplomatic immunity. The royal fox has made bargains with various objects and concepts, making it completely immune to them and their ill effects. So you can give the immunities here to your royal fox that you encounter with the D20 table. It also says it knows 1d6 random spells between level 1 and 5, so you could assign it some spells as a magical creature. And again, this could be something that you would encounter that may or may not be something you would need to fight. There's a section here on factions of the Weird and Wild. I'm going to sort of skip over this. This would be more if you were using the setting for what it is and how it is described. And there's a bunch of different factions listed here. Ooh, the Wild Elves. That's interesting. So you could choose, the Wild Elves have treasure. You could choose to put your party into one of these areas, like one of the factions, for example. Artifacts of the Wild Hunter. These are things that you might find in the wild. And it's not there's no numbered here. I don't know if there are 50 of them. They're not numbered, but if you wanted to do something random, you could figure that out for yourself. lots of different things. And again, as is typical of this material, some of them have little random tables within them. Magic of the weird. Magic is a living thing. Its power and knowledge are immeasurable, and it is a raw and primal force, not a magic refined by years of study and practice, but a power that fuels all the wild's creation. The spells below are such, rough and untamed in their potential. They're presented in the most applicable form, and it says systems that have more complex rules with magic only need to make small additions to utilize them. And it says the potential and power lies in the hands of players and GMs. So what this is telling you is that you're getting a generalized description. So here's one, for example, spell level 1, Bark Blast. Its range is touch, duration of an hour. By touching a tree and uttering the magic words, you create a magical explosive that detonates on your command with the force of a black powder bomb, dealing 1d10 damage to everything within 5 feet of the tree as they are shredded with splinters and fire. The tree must be alive, and the caster need to be within visual range of the tree in order to detonate it. When cast, it is almost impossible to spot, save for a subtle bulge of the bark and a strong heat that radiates from said bulge. Each spell level beyond level 1 deals an extra 1d10 damage. So that's an interesting mechanic for if you cast it as a higher level character. And we'll just look at one more random one here. Furry Pelt. This is another level 1. You could cast it on yourself or another for 8 hours. Your skin sprouts a thin layer of fur all across your body that protects you from the cold. The type and color of your hair depends, but it is always warm and dry enough to provide you with a comfortable sleep during the night, as well as avoid most harmful effects of the natural elements. Root Bridge. You touch a patch of a tree, root, or vegetation and command a bridge to slowly creep and form in front of you. So they are, here's another one, take root. Your legs sprout roots, embedding into the ground and rooting you in place. And the end part of the book is an appendix which has rules and tables for using the material if you're going to be creating a wilderness, as well as this helpful sheet here that I've printed out because I want to demonstrate how this works for you. Although I do want to say to be aware that there is some error in the printing such that you end up wasting a ton of your toner because it gives you these black things here and it's not showing up that way. Had I realized that, I wouldn't have printed it. However, just that's a little bit of a warning. It's not going to come out like this, at least in the digital file that I have. I got this instead. In any case, I'm going to show you a little bit of how you could use this and just sort of follow through the instructions to see what we get. And the first thing we are meant to do. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to determine these are 6 mile hexes. We're going to determine this area here. So we're going to first of all roll a D8 to determine the amount of areas that we have. I'm skipping over the entrance part for a second. We're going to have 5 areas. So we're going to grab 5 D6s and attempt to get them all into this section here. That's a little bit tough. I'll just bring it down here. Ooh, 2 6s nearby. Well, we'll just keep it. We'll just keep what we got here. And we're going to look and see then on this table here what each of the areas is. So this could be a hamlet or a large riverbed. The 6 is, a ruined abbey and an acre of trees. And we have a hillside or a cow pasture. And then over here we have a stump or a large puddle. Interesting. And the next thing we're going to do is we need to roll for the D6 plus 1 number of trails that are going to be connecting these things. So let's do that. 3 trails connecting these things. So we could have one, we can sort of get to all of them actually. Let's see, the ruined abbey and the acre of trees, they can be connected. Maybe they're not an actual trail. We want a trail from the hamlet. This is definitely going to be a hamlet to the hillside here and the stump. So that's what we do there. And then we find out what each type of trail is going to be. So this is going to be the first trail from the hamlet to the Abbey, the ruined Abbey here, is going to be, what sort of trail is it going to be? It's going to be a footpath. All right. And then from the, let's see, do we want to, we'll connect the hamlet also to that hillside area with another footpath. So an area of low development. And then our third trail will be we'll go from the acre of trees that's next to the Abbey also over to that stump or large puddle. That's how we'll do it. That's 8. Ooh, that's going to be special. Now, what does special mean? So right away, when I'm doing this now, I'm thinking that there's going to be the fact that it's special between what's described as the acre of trees and like this puddle. Maybe that's kind of like a magical area or something of that nature. Let's see, where do they give description of special? So a special trail, a path that is odd and exists outside the realm of reason. GMs are free to come up with whatever they choose, so long as it's unique and interesting. Okay, so for that, I would immediately start to populate that special trail with some of the things that are offered here, like there's flora and hazards and things of that nature. What we're going to do next is we're going to develop, let's see, okay, the random trails and paths that we rolled are going to, there's a D50 table here, so let's describe the path between the hamlet and this first Abbey. And that's going to be a 14, which is going to be immaculate. Slowly ascending marble steps are lit by bronze braziers. So from the hamlet to the Abbey, there's clearly, the Abbey is the site of some revered, it says it's ruined, but some revered deities, or the site of this, maybe it's a magical druidic religion here, because right next to it with the same number on the die is this, as described, the acre of the forest. So perhaps the forest is going to be something of significance, and I think that we should actually give this a name. Let's get a name here for, we're looking for at the forest. Let's get the name of this forest. That's not going to work as a roll. Here we go. So we've got the hills. Well, now the hills, we have self-described hills, so maybe the hills, we're going to be naming the hills. The hills of dead kings. All right, it's time for me to make some written notes here. All right, I started a sort of crude drawing of the area here. So here's the hills of the dead kings, and I think we gave the choice here, it could be a stump or a large puddle, but conceptually I think a stump makes sense. It's connected to this acre of trees, which in turn is connected to a ruined abbey that's clearly important by this magical path. So maybe the stump represents something like some of the magic being destroyed, or I'm not really sure. And we have this notion of dead kings. I want to try to get a name for the abbey. So I'm going to go back and roll here. I'll still start with the prefix, but I could just decide it's Abbey. Let's see, 26. Hunting grounds. I do like to, and so it, again, an 86 becomes, an 86 is going to become a 36 in this chart. So hunting grounds of storms, we got remains. Let's bring that differently. Remains, and then the 90 is going to become a 40. Remains of the flesh. Maybe this abbey, we can call that remains of the flesh. Not loving any of that. Let's see, what's the danger at the abbey? We have a 26, so the danger at the abbey, seeming shelters are always trapped. Well, thematically, that just says to me that if you go there, it's dangerous. I don't know. Not getting so much there. And a 15 for the woods. Let's see. The danger in the woods. Magic and spells have a terrible life of their own. So we have the trap nature. I think this is telling us that like a corrosive magic or a corrosive deity perhaps has taken over this area that resulted in its ruination, and perhaps this stump, if the trees were representative or formerly representative of good magic and good powers and natural things in the world, this stump is, and they were corroded. Perhaps there were peoples or something that somehow managed through this magic path to take one of those trees to preserve some of that magic and goodness, which is now decaying in a stump. Maybe that is the quest that the party is picking up in this hamlet, that they have to find their way through this magical path and all the treacherous dangers that are there to somehow rescue the stump or something. Not so sure what we got. The Hills of the Dead Kings here. Maybe that is the locate. Well, first of all, maybe that's not even part of what we need to do, or maybe that is a place where maybe the hills are actually massively underground kind of crypts and things with items or corpses, or I don't know. Who knows? Just beginning to fill this out, obviously, with off the cuff thinking about how this could function. We didn't say anything yet about the hamlet here, nor did I add in, well, oh, here's a walk through the woods. So, well, let's see. Okay, there's types of woods, so I didn't notice that. Let's see. We have an acre of trees, so let's see let's see something more about this acre of trees. And we got a 43. So the types of woods here: impossibly tall sequoias that disappear into the sky. Okay, that's not telling me a ton, really. 56 is actually a 6. Thorny underbrush begs for blood. Well, that is a little bit more thematic in a sense to what I'm talking about, where there is some indication of a horror here. And let's see, so we've got a smells and sounds. Let's see what that is. 27 is going to be musk and odor stifles the air, growing stronger the deeper you go. So a sense of foreboding, perhaps. There's a D50 table of encounters, and these reference back to the beasts that are in the book here. So I didn't mention that earlier when I was talking about the beasts, but that's quite useful. We're not going to go to that right now. I think let's just roll up. There's 100 locations. Let's say we're exploring this area. We know we have a hamlet, we have trees, we have the ruined abbey, we have a hillside, and we have this stump thing. Can we give some more information to any of them? Oh, old growth. Okay, a carpet of pulsing root-like growths cover and strangle everything within sight. Well, that would seem to be the description of our forest here. The air grows heavy and airless, while life and color is drained from the surroundings. The old growth is a primordial life form, old when the world was young. It is driven by an insatiable hunger and seeks to consume all in its path. So perhaps what's happening here is that is the site. That is what is the site of what's taking over and has taken over this abbey to cause it to be ruined. And that is like an alive kind of place. And what else? Where else do we have in this world? We rolled a 3. Ale spring. A small rocky pool of liquid arises from deep in the ground and flows into a stream. Well, now we did mention that the hamlet could be by a riverbed. Foamy and gold, it smells of hops and ale. It is ale. Well, lager, technically. It has a well-rounded flavor and slight hint of malted sweetness. It flows out cold, etc. There is no detectable magic, but it does beg the question of how it's being made. Well, I could take this to mean if the ale spring, the remnants of this ale spring is here in the hamlet, maybe the hamlet is a peaceful place. Maybe it is a nice place and a source of goodness or joy in some way. 63. Mulfanus's Myconid farm. The canopy is thick and the air is moist, smelling of compost. Clusters of mushrooms bloom all about, planted neatly into row after row of great decaying logs. Every type of mushroom, magic or mundane, can be found here. Carefully maintained by an enormous, mirthful grub named Molithan, is willing to part with some of its specimens, but only for sufficient help with its garden. Well, perhaps this magical farm with the magical mushrooms is on this special type of path here. There is a section of the book that gives you some flora, and we'll take a look at here, wild flora. There are various mushrooms here. I don't know if there's more than one, but there certainly is one here. And this is where I would go to populate this mushroom farm. Maybe it is something that has to be discovered through special actions, and maybe whatever is found here is going to help be restorative in some manner with the magic. We'll do one more roll on the locations. I don't have anything about that hillside yet. 47. A junkyard. A colossal kidney-shaped gorge slopes down at a sharp angle on all sides. Well, that could be a hillside. Inside the gorge lies mountains upon mountains of trash and garbage. It reeks of rot and is alive with pathetic life that picks through the filth for sustenance. The junkyard is filled with almost any common good, typically broken or ruined, but legend has it that there are great treasures buried within the mounds of garbage. So prevalent are these rumors that roving gangs of violent prospectors prowl the tunnels and trenches of this junkyard. Well, absolutely, the concept here of a junkyard would be abstracted to this hillside of dead kings, and I think perhaps what would be in here, I would say, would be, I would roll on the I search the body table here to get a number of things. Perhaps I would roll I'm not going to go through all of this now, but what I would probably do would be, say, to roll a d10. So I got a 7. So there could be 7 items here. And the first one would be 25, a battered tin cage containing an well, sorry, I had to stop filming for a minute due to some external noise nearby. All right. So this is a battered tin cage containing an unruly quillif, and a quillif is described, it's one of the, I'm pretty sure, here it is, the quillifs. That's actually pretty cute. It looks like it would be unruly. So this, you have to first of all save versus breath weapon, or having a painful quill implanted into your skin. The quill makes concentration and fine motor skill difficult. There's a quillif special attack. It launches all of its spikes in an explosive fashion, so it's in some kind of cage. And I'm not going to go through and read all of this, but interesting here, I see, despite the danger they possess, there is a profitable trade based around the trapping and butchering of them. So somebody in this mound of garbage and maybe partially decayed beasts that were captured in the area, there's one here at least that's still around, so maybe that could be retrieved for its uncommon good. Its long dark spines with a serrated edge. These are going to be capable of being crafted into any kind of weapon, maybe a magic weapon. So depending on how expansive you wanted to get with your story, you could have your adventurers needing to travel here to get that thing, and maybe use that particular magic item to kill whoever is destroying the Abbey, continuing to do that. Obviously, you have these very dangerous woods here that are sucking the life out of anyone who goes into them. Maybe they're sucking the life out of it and then sort of putting the decayed things. We don't have a visible path between the woods and this hillside, but maybe maybe there's some underground area that could be discovered that's like the traveling between the two of these areas. I mean, who knows? There's so many different ways to go. And that was I decided there were going to be 7 things in my area. That was just the first one here. So you could see I started to write it here with the noise of just building out what the descriptions that we've come. We haven't really had a description of the stump per se. I'm not sure we necessarily need one. We might be able to discover that as we go. We're doing this as if we were mapping out the whole area. And again, we haven't really focused on the hamlet yet, putting somebody in it. You could go back here and look and see what type of possible NPCs would live in here. I think you get the point that there is just this is fantastic. I mean, it really is. It's a combination of just a adventure wilderness starter, but then it also gives you the specifics of how to populate it just using this material, but you could also use it in some other system. You could generate this and port it into some other actual system. Again, the only thing that this doesn't have right here are rules or descriptions of the characters that you would build and abilities and things, because you would bring that in. It is designed, as mentioned, as a supplement. It's incredibly impressive in terms of the breadth of material it gives, and this wilderness generator is just great. I'm loving what I'm coming up with here and thinking that it would be very possible to play it out in a story using just material from Into the Weird and Wild, but then also transfer it into a whole other world and a whole other story that would take place in this area too. So I hope you enjoyed this look into the Weird and Wild. There is more I could have gone into, even just showing you more of the details, but this video is also getting a little lengthy, and I think you can get a sense of the richness of the offerings here in this book, and I highly recommend it if you want to do any type of wilderness adventure that would be adjacent to or firmly in this type of kind of weird world.